The AFC East in 2024 was probably one of the more obvious divisions when it comes to who was going to win it and represent that division in the playoffs. Even though we thought the New York Jets and the Miami Dolphins could be possible teams that could push for that division, it was pretty early on that we knew New York wasn't going to be doing it, and with constant injuries to Tagovailoa throughout not just in 2024 but the last three seasons, Miami fell out of it pretty quickly as well. And the New England Patriots, there really wasn't much of a chance for them to win last year, especially with the shoddy coaching job that happened in 2024 as well. All four of these teams took to the 2025 NFL Draft with goals of improving their team. However, each team had very different game plans when it comes to how they address their roster needs and how they look to the future of their franchises. Starting with the Buffalo Bills and how they looked before the draft, you obviously have Josh Allen on your team, the MVP of the 2024 NFL season. You also have guys on the defensive end that you are hoping can come back from kind of down years. Matt Milano was often injured in 2024. AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau have not really developed into those top-tier pass rushers like they were drafted to be. And offensively, outside of Allen, you really have James Cook, and Khalil Shakur had a solid year, but again, nothing else really stood out. This team still was a 13-4 win team, or they were a 13-4 team last year. They still made the AFC Championship game and were probably, outside of the Chiefs, the best team in the NFL. In the draft, Buffalo had an obvious goal to improve the defense, namely the defensive line, with TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, and Deone Walker being three of their top four selections. They also grab Maxwell Hairston in the first round of this year's draft at number 30. A pretty good draft for Buffalo overall. I think a B plus is probably a pretty good grade. Like I said, you potentially get three D-line starters in TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, and Deone Walker. I think the pick of Landon Jackson is also one of those picks where he could be a third, fourth round guy that just is an energy, a guy that you can always rely on to bring a high motor to the table. There was a heavy focus on the defense in general, which was to be expected. That's probably the weaker side of the ball. Built upon the additions in free agency, they add Joey Bosa in free agency, and they bring in guys that are going to supplement him as well in that pass rush and run defense game. There still is not really a true number one receiver. And I know we bring in Josh Palmer, and I know we have Khalil Shakur, and I know we hope that Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox and James Cook can be reliable players in the passing game for Buffalo, but still there's not that true number one guy unless Keon Coleman takes that massive step in his second year. Next up is the 9-8 team of the AFC East, the Miami Dolphins, a team that was kind of in it for the NFL, or the AFC wild card up until they weren't in Week 18. This team is highlighted by their two big name, big money offensive players in Tua and Tyreek Hill. And it's really the reason why this team depth-wise is not really there. Offensive line, you do have some decent names. With Teron Armstead, you have James Daniels, and you have Aaron Brewer, but the rest of your offensive line is pretty weak. Your defensive line, unless you can really count on Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, and Zach Sealer, Phillips and Chubb, two guys who have had pretty terrible injury luck these last few years, so it's not really like you can rely on them much. And then in the defensive back group, that's kind of the same deal. You have Jalen Ramsey making all this money, and then not really much behind him. And so I think Miami kind of had a plan in terms of their trenches to improve not only the depth but the talent. They get Kenneth Grant, who probably was one of the better defensive tackle options available, not just at 13 but in the draft in general. Jonah Savanaia from Arizona was probably one of the top offensive line prospects in the entire draft. It was probably a bit of a surprise to many people that he was available in the second round. And then you don't see another pick for Miami until round 5. They take 3 round 5 selections, 1 in round 6 and 2 in round 7. And it's kind of that discrepancy, not discrepancy, I guess the drop off from picking in round 1 and 2 to picking all the way in round 5. Grant and Savanaia, like I said, are good picks. And you get some good late round value. I think the value of Ollie Gordon and Quinn Ewers, that's great value in round 6 and 7. But you're lucky if you get 3 starters from this draft. And honestly, you're lucky if you get 2. We think Kenneth Grant and Savanaia are going to project as good NFL players, but again, those are just projections. So if you're looking at this draft as a whole, I think a C is kind of warranted. This wasn't a good draft. It wasn't a bad draft, but you kind of think that maybe Miami should have maybe done some more trades, gotten more picks in the 3rd or 4th round instead of so many in the late day 3 picks. But that's just kind of how it went for Miami this year. At 4-13 last year, the New England Patriots bring into 2025 a pre-NFL draft depth that, it's got some pretty good names. You have Diggs. You obviously have Drake May, Ramondre Stevenson. Hunter Henry had a pretty good year last year, all things considered. And the defense is where you're hoping this team shines, right? Christian Barmore, Milton Williams, Harold Landry, guys like Anthony Jennings, Christian Ellis, Kayvon Chason, Monty Rice. You're kind of going to need to see who can develop into that 3rd or 4th pass rusher on the outside. And then in the back end is really where this team, I think, is going to shine. They signed Carlton Davis to be opposite of Christian Gonzalez. You have Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers in the back end. You hope you still get a developing Marte Mapu. All around a pretty good team for New England. There was an obvious need at offensive line. And I think the pick that everybody saw coming in the first round was going to be Will Campbell going to New England. Regardless of whether he plays at tackle or plays at guard, he's going to be a solid contributor in his first round, in his first year as a Patriot, and probably for the next 10 to 15 years as a New England Patriot. They also get Trevion Henderson and Kyle Williams, who probably are going to be Drake May's best friends for the next 4 or 5 years as his number 1 running back option and possibly number 1 wide receiver option. There's also names like Jared Wilson and Braden Swinson. Wilson probably projected as one of the better centers in the entire draft this year. And Braden Swinson, even though he didn't have a lot of production throughout his entire career at LSU, you saw that he was a player kind of coming into his own in his 5th year at LSU. And so you hope, obviously, that he can continue that development going into the NFL. This is one of the best drafts that any team had in 2025. Possibly getting 4 starters on the offense in year 1. I know Jared Wilson probably doesn't start right away because Garrett Bradbury is probably the starting center. But, if Will Campbell's your left or right tackle, maybe Jared Wilson's your left or right guard. Either way, I think you have Trevion Henderson probably supplementing and maybe even taking over as the number 1 running back from Ramondre Stevenson. And Kyle Williams, even if he's your number 2 wide receiver, he's going to be on the field a lot for New England, and he's going to be a really good option for Drake May going forward. Last but not least, the New York Jets, who had a pretty tough year last year, 5-12, and they have gone in a different direction, to say the least. Replacing Aaron Rodgers with Justin Fields, still having guys like Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard. You hope this is the year where Malachi Corley improves. Not really a tight end option pre-draft. Defense, this is where you have some, your big names. You have Quentin Wilson, you have Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, and then your linebackers. You have 3 pretty good linebackers between C.J. Mosley, Quincy Williams, and Jamie Sherwood, and then obviously Sauce Gardner at cornerback. Now, I think the Jets knew that they didn't really have a tight end option. They do select Mason Taylor with a number 42 pick in the second round. They get Armin Membu out of Missouri in round 1. And they get some pretty good depth, at the very least, with Azariah Thomas from Florida State and Malachi Moore from Alabama. Malachi Moore was a 5-year player at Alabama, and I think a lot of people forget that he was kind of the guy at safety that was the do-it-all guy, either playing in the nickel, playing over top, whatever Nick Saban wanted to do, until he got injured, and then Brian Branch stepped in over Malachi Moore. I'm going to give the Jets a B. Again, great potential with Membu and Taylor, and I think Thomas and Moore could probably be some late-round gems when we get to the end of this season. The Arian Smith pick was probably awful, if we're being honest with ourselves. When you just talk about speed, he has probably some of the best speed from this year's draft, and he's going to enter the NFL as one of the fastest players in the league. But that's pretty much all he's going to be able to do. If he's a punt returner, cool. He's probably not worth a 4th-round pick. The wide receivers that were available at this time are better than Arian Smith. And with the needs that New York has, a wide receiver that is only going to be able to have great straight line speed, it's not a good pick at all. I think the AFC East had probably one of the better divisional drafts this year. You had a lot of top end talent go to these teams. Obviously, Miami, I didn't love their draft. I think this is kind of one of those years where you look at Miami and say maybe they're trying to tank a little bit. The Jets, a solid year drafting for them. But obviously the Patriots and the Bills, these are going to be the two teams I think kind of fighting it out for that divisional crown these next 5 years, solely off of this draft. I know the Bills were pretty put together, and the Patriots already had their franchise quarterback before this year, but these were 2 drafts from both of these teams where it improves their team and it puts them in a good position in the future while building around their star quarterbacks.